While I was replacing Dora's valve cover gaskets, I noticed a small coolant leak coming from the thermostat housing. Since I was already working in the engine, I decided to replace the thermostat housing as well. If you're new to the channel, Dora is my 2001 Ford Explorer Sport Trac. This replacement procedure should be the same for all Fords with the 4-liter single overhead cam V6 engine. These thermostat housings are self-contained units, meaning the thermostat, temperature sensors, and the housing are all one unit. Only a few tools will be needed for this job. Your hose clamp tool of choice, a hose pliers, a trim removal tool, some picks, some extensions, a 7mm, 8mm, and 10mm sockets, a 1/4 inch ratchet, some wrenches for the hard to reach bolts, and a gasket scraper. Again, the bit driver is optional to speed things up a bit. The needle nose pliers and the forceps are used to fish out any debris that falls into the coolant passages. Start by draining the engine coolant. Most radiators have a drain on one side at the bottom. Next, remove the air intake assembly. This gives us plenty of room to access the thermostat housing. Remove the 4 bolts that hold the throttle body in place. Set it off to the side, out of the way. Disconnect the alternator wiring harness from the alternator and move it away from the thermostat housing. If the battery was not disconnected, wrap the end of the wire to prevent accidental sparking. Using your preferred hose clamp tool, remove the upper radiator hose from the housing. To access the rear bolts of the housing, the upper radiator hose outlet must be removed from the housing. There are 3 bolts that hold this outlet in place. Remove the thermostat from the housing. From here on, be careful not to drop any bolts or tools into the opening, as they could disappear into the engine bowels, never to be seen again by the light of day. Remove the small radiator hose from the housing. I'm not using the correct tool for the clamp because I forgot I had the blue hose clamp pliers in my toolbox. If only someone had created a video telling me what tools I required in the first place. Remove the 3 bolts that hold the housing in place. Also, if the electrical connectors for the temperature sensors have not yet been disconnected, do so now. There is one more coolant hose to disconnect at the bottom of the housing. Remove the old thermostat housing from the engine block. Just look at all this tasty goodness. A rat probably got in here at some point and nibbled at the space filler package and made themselves a nice little nest. After a quick hit with the vacuum cleaner, I did not find any rat remains, so PETA has nothing to worry about here. I used the gasket scraper and a rag to clean up the mounting surface of the thermostat housing. I did have to go fishing for a couple small pieces of material inside the coolant passages. Have you ever wondered how a thermostat works? Here's the thermostat itself. This spring keeps the thermostat closed, preventing the coolant from circulating to the radiator. Instead, it is diverted back into the engine block. Once the coolant reaches a certain temperature, the thermostat opens, allowing the coolant to flow to the radiator. To see this work, I've placed the thermostat into a bowl of hot water. With a bit of editing skills, we can watch the thermostat open in record time. Pretty neat, right? Alright, back to the regularly scheduled programming. Before installing the new thermostat housing to the engine block, disassemble the housing and remove the thermostat. We need some clearance, Clarence. I found it easier to reconnect the coolant temperature sensor connectors and reconnect the lower coolant hose before installing the housing bolts. The rest of the install is the reverse of the removal. Before reinstalling the air intake assembly, Refill the coolant to check for any leaks. If none are found, reinstall the air intake assembly. Anytime the coolant circuit is opened, the cooling system needs to be bled. This means getting all of the air bubbles out of the system. A professional shop may have a vacuum fill system to do this, but I am not a professional shop, so I am using one of these handy-dandy coolant fill funnel systems. These work by becoming the highest point in the cooling system for air bubbles to escape. Fill the coolant without the engine running until no bubbles come out. Then start the engine and let it run at idle. Monitor the coolant level and add to the funnel if needed. The engine needs to run long enough to open the thermostat housing. Once the engine is at temperature and the bubbles stop coming, turn the engine off. Use the plunger to seal off the funnel. Remove the radiator adapter and reinstall the factory cap. Put the remaining coolant from the funnel into the coolant reservoir. Then take a short test drive and monitor the engine coolant temperature gauge. If it jumps all over the place, there is a good chance air is still in the system. Repeat the funnel process if needed. Do a final check and make sure no leaks are present. This is Rooster. Stay cool out there.